Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and keep it going for Kate Taggart.
I'm on the phone with my boyfriend. This is the second guy I had ever slept with, and the first one that I was in love with. So I wanted to tell him all my crazy ideas about sex. We're talking about our favorite positions, and he says, doggy style is totally my favorite. I say, doggy style, it's kind of boring, it's a one-way position. He's like, what is a one-way position? So I explain. What happens if you were to switch us up in that scenario, right? Like, we couldn't still be fucking. It would just be me kind of like lightly tapping my pelvis against her butt. Now, quick side trip. This was 2007. I had not heard of pegging. So I now know better, as do we all. So forgive me if my 2007 self called doggy style a one-way position. I said, you know what gets a bad rap? Missionary, because it's a both ways position. You can be on top, I can be on top, and we can still be fucking. He says, one-way position, both-way position, who cares? And I said, well, I do. I said, sex is most meaningful to me when we focus on the symmetries between us. And I didn't have words, really, to fully express at the time what I wanted to express. And so I kind of bumbled through this explanation, very long-winded. And at a certain point, he gets frustrated with me and says, I have a stick and you have a hole and they're never going to be equal. So I hung up the phone. And then I didn't talk to anyone about these ideas for roughly 8 years. What was the point? After all the logistics you have to go through when you're going to start shagging with someone new on the regular, talking about when's the last time you've been tested, preferred methods of birth control, PTSD triggers, after all that, was I really going to say, also, here's a copy of Kate's Crackpot Gender Theories 101 for you to study before we hop in the sack? No, of course not. In the years that followed, though, I did find language to express what I came to understand as my non-binary identity. And to me, that means that there's nothing that's predetermined by my biology, nothing about who I am or how I dress or how I act or even what I can experience. That's predetermined just because I'm female-bodied. I had tried testing the waters with these ideas a little bit with some partners here and there. For example, I think the fact that we always refer to intercourse as penetration is kind of fucked up. It's one type of intercourse. Sometimes I really like enveloping. But most people don't want to talk about those words with me because they feel like they're icky and they get uncomfortable. And so the word that I came up with was driving. And so with most of my partners, that was the code for who's in charge right now, who's driving. Several years later, I'm on the phone with my boyfriend again, different boyfriend. And he's telling me about how he wishes so badly that he was female-bodied because he feels like there's a certain level of emotional intimacy that he'll never be able to achieve simply because he doesn't have a vagina. Inside my head, I'm waving a tiny pendant that says, no, your biology doesn't define you. But he was expressing his world to me, and I wanted to engage with that. And let's face it, that was at least light years beyond sticks, holes, never going to be equal land. So I engaged with what he was trying to get at. And I pointed to the outfield, and I said, I bet we can get you those experiences with your male body. My next thought was, my mouth might be writing a check that my body can't cash. But I didn't want to live in a world where that wasn't true. So we make some jokes, we get off the phone. Later that week, we go out on a fancy dress-up date. I'm wearing a dress. I very rarely wear a dress. And so, I was in this very feminine energy kind of space that night, and when it got time to shag up, I was like, hey, you're driving tonight. So after we had kind of satiated that energy, we were just resting, and I look over at him and I think, I want so much to give him that experience that he's looking for. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I figure it starts with being vulnerable. I had a scarf, so I took that, tied it around his eyes, added his wrists into the knot. And then I get on top of him. He's lying on his back. I get on top of him to straddle him, and he says, I want to feel you in between my legs. I have no idea how I'm going to do this, mind you, but I was really excited for a split second. So I say, okay, sweetheart. So I wiggle one knee in between his and the other. So now I'm just kind of lying on top of him. And in what was one of the most heroic push-ups of my life, I kind of wiggle myself up on top of him, envelop him, and shunk back down. And I'm like, okay, now we're stuck. We are joined at the pelvises, and we are just stuck. It's what am I going to do now? And then I started going through these memories in my head of what it's like to have sex as a female-bodied person with a male-bodied person. So I start thrusting with my pelvis, and more sketches come back to me. At one point I kind of worried that I was kind of crushing him, but I was like, that's part of the deal, so. There was another point at which, he was trying really hard to keep his legs up, but he didn't have his hands, right? So I noticed his legs were getting tired, and I was like, pro tip, you wrap your legs around my back, you can hook your heels together. Which he did, and it helped. So after we go along like this for a while, something kind of crazy happens. I kind of forget that I'm in my own body, forget that I have a vagina, and I kind of have a phantom cock. It sounds crazy, and in the moment I was like, I can't believe this is actually an experience that I'm having. But yeah, it was like phantom limb syndrome, except I had a cock. And I didn't want this to end because I was like, this is some crazy magic spell shit. I don't know how we got into this. Probably not going to have this experience again. Let's just go as long as we can. There was one point at which he was like, hey, can you untie me for a second? I need some water. But I was like, no, my phantom cock, it might break the magic spell. So I'm like, I know how to get you water, just stay put. So I drink some water and feed it to him like a baby bird. The gist of it is, I had never felt so seen or enjoyed for who I am as I did in that moment. The next day, we're on the phone again, and he says, this morning, a song that's like My Daughter's in My Song came on the radio, and I just started bawling. He said, I think that had everything to do with last night. And then he asks me, do you know what proprioceptive sense is? I said, nope, haven't heard of it. He said, it's the thing that gets screwed up when you have phantom limb syndrome. And then he says, I could have sworn I had a vagina last night, and this sounds crazy. And I was like, no, it doesn't sound crazy at all. I was so afraid to say anything. We had sex like that a few more times, and then we broke up for other reasons, but that doesn't take away the knowledge that I now have, which is that the only thing that limits my experiences as a person is finding someone who's game and suspending my own disbelief.